Hi guys, this is part 3 of chapter 12. I want to tell you about artificial selection and natural selection. So this first slide is about artificial selection and how we humans can actually artificially alter allele frequencies. And this is an interesting slide. It shows you the wild mustard, the yellow flower here. You know, that's the one that grows along Highway 1 there, Davenport, that area where the fields in spring are really beautiful because they're all yellow. That's wild mustard. And botanists have bred that over and over and over again. And when they've bred it for stems, for those plants that have the strongest stems and flowers, you end up with broccoli. And when you breed it for lateral buds, so when it has little tiny buds at the side, and then you breed it with another one that has lots of those, and you breed it again with another one that has lots of those, you end up with Brussels sprouts. And just like that, they've taken this wild mustard, bred it over and over again, and created cauliflower, kale, cabbage. All these come from an artificial selection of the wild mustard plant called Brassica oleracea. So, you know, in animal husbandry, we've been doing this for years also, getting animals and breeding them for fat or for horns or for greater milk production. And that artificial selection we've done over and over again. So when it comes to natural selection, how is that happening on its own? So that's also descent with modification, right? There's a change that's happened and it's modified, like the gradual change of the finches over time on the Galapagos Islands. It integrates the thoughts of Malthus, his idea on populations and how they grow. So if you have a limit on populations, a limit of food, a limit of how many organisms can grow in a particular area, then there's going to be competition, because if you have too many individuals, then what's going to happen is they're going to be competing. And if there's competition, then you have to win, essentially. And winning means being the best adapted to that environment so that you can feed better than anybody else, you can find a mate better than anybody else, and you can get ahead, essentially. And this is what organisms do. They try and get ahead. So that concept of natural selection then rises from this and the thought of differential reproductive success. It means not only will you feed more, not only will you do better in this environment, but you will probably leave a greater number of offspring because you will be able to reproduce successfully, whether you're a plant or an animal. So that's very important, is how well you do to live and also to leave offspring. Humans too are a species that is competing for resources, right? So any adaptation that you think of enhances reproductive success. But think of it as natural selection doesn't really create a change. Like I showed you these camouflaged insects. Natural selection doesn't purposely create that. Instead, it selects for that camouflage. And alleles that rise by chance. So they're selecting in the event of a change happening and one particular organism having these little red tips here that looks like a dying leaf a little bit. That one, let's say that organism does really well because he doesn't get eaten because the birds really confuse him with a leaf. And so guess what? If he doesn't get eaten, he gets to leave more offspring because he gets to live and mate and leave more offspring. So natural selection isn't creating the change, but it is selecting. Once it finds an organism that does better, it's going to leave more offspring in the next generation. So I'm saying in the slide, some individuals are better than others at surviving and reproducing. So they can obtain nutrients, they can obtain water, they don't get eaten. They maybe tolerate temperature changes, they attract mates, they reproduce, they're doing well. So they're successful, essentially. So we think that since more individuals are born than resources can support, that struggle to survive is going to be inevitable. If it's a struggle, then you've got to get ahead somehow. This is just a dandelion that's leaving hundreds of seeds. They look like little parachutes that take off and are going to land and leave seeds somewhere else. And that reproductive manner is very successful. Make lots of seeds and blow them in lots of directions and have many more dandelions on everybody else's lawns. So I'm going to show you 2 slides now. One's called The Logic of Natural Selection, and then the next one is the inference from those observations. But let me backtrack. The logic of natural selection. The observation then that we're noticing is that there is genetic variation. Within a species, no 2 individuals are exactly alike. So some are going to be more adapted. Some are going to do better if they're different. 2, there are limited resources. Every habitat contains limited supplies of the resources required for survival. So it's going to be competitive. And if you do better, you're going to outsmart the other organism, then you are the one that's going to leave more offspring. 3, overproduction of offspring. More individuals are born than survive to reproduce. So the dandelion, all those seeds, very few of them are going to make it. But if you overproduce those seeds, then it is more likely that some of them will make it. Okay, so this is what we observe in nature. So what is what comes next? So what about those observations? Well, number 1, there's a struggle for existence. Individuals compete for the limited resources. 2, unequal reproductive success. So maybe one dandelion that was tiny and wimpier and put out fewer seeds is going to leave fewer offspring than the other dandelion that was big and maybe it was in a place where there was more water and was able to put out more seed and do better. So it's an unequal reproductive success. Some will do better than others. 3 says descent with modification. Over many generations, natural selection can change the characteristics of populations, even giving rise to new species. So if all of a sudden I have that leaf with the brown edges, and they didn't used to have brown edges, but one ended up with brown edges, left many offspring, those offspring left many offspring, and those offspring left even more, then there's going to be a change in the characteristics of that population. All of a sudden, more of the population is going to have that brown edge to the insect, looking more like a leaf. Some organisms do this super well, and sometimes they're thought of as a superorganism. Think of roaches. Roaches do really well. They live everywhere. They feed on everything. They invade, especially in the tropics, they can invade any kitchen, any place that has food, and do leave lots of offspring. Rats in New York City, they have taken over, right? They do super well, and they're very well adapted and leave lots of offspring. So we're going to consider them a superorganism, maybe. The meaning of fitness, that word fitness, is very important because we talk about it in terms of survival of the fittest. So to be fit, what does that mean in biological terms? It doesn't mean to be big and strong. So for example, this ant, the Argentinian ant, invaded California, and it has completely decimated the populations of horned toads. It gets into their little holes, it attacks the toads, these lizards, and it destroys those populations. So it's not that they're big and strong, but that they have been able to successfully carve out this little niche for themselves. And to be fit in biology means to leave lots of offspring. The classic example I give is the honeybee drones, because this is a male honeybee here, and what they do in a hive, in a colony, all they need to do is mate with new queens, with virgin queens, and leave their genes in the next population, and that would increase their fitness. But it turns out that they can't always do that because they can't find a queen, so they have no fitness at all. And when they do find a queen, and they can mate with a queen, they will have their genes go on in the next generation, but while mating or after mating, they die. So a dead drone bee that has left his genes in the next population has a greater fitness than the one that lived and never mated. Is that weird, you guys? I'm going to stop there.